Hi, welcome to day 3. Today it's time to make my bikini, and as you perhaps know, I've bought this beautiful fabric from Stitch and Ink Fabrics. Yes, this is going to be the material for my bikini and my daughter's bikini. And here I've already made a sketch because I wasn't sure which style to make. I'm planning a high-waisted, quite cheeky bottom, and the top will be with a ruffle here and with a tie here in the front and plain in the back. In general, for swimwear, I like this clean workmanship where you don't see stitching on the front. This is an old bottom for me, and as the elastic is anyways broken already, we can cut this now open and have a look. So for the bottom, I want to use the pattern of my high-waisted bikini bottom here, and I put it on already, and I placed safety pins here, like a drawing, how to change to this pattern to receive the outcome which I wish. So I will take this pattern and I will try to change it to the shape I want to have. For the top, I'm planning to use another pattern from Sewing Machine, the Eckhart top, as a base and hack it into the shape with everything. Let's hope this will work out, but we'll see. So here again in detail the plans: high-waisted with a V shape here at the upper edge, little bit cheeky on the back. This is the bottom, and the top should be like this with a tie knot in the front, ruffle here and plain in the back. Small straps here, that's the side view. So here is this clean workmanship. From the outside you see nothing, and at the inside there's stitching on the lining to hold everything at the inside. And we have to take care here that the outer layer is cut out a little bit bigger than the inside layer. And as I've already made first experiences with my bottom here, I already know that I have to cut the outer layer 1 centimeter wider than the lining. So let's have a look here inside. Do you hear that? It's really broken. Okay. Okay, we see here along the edges this white elastic which holds the edges. Yes. The upper edge is not stitched. I guess there it wasn't possible. But here in the back they added a zigzag stitching on the lining layer. So the lining is stitched on the seam allowance. I will use this from elastic silicone tape for the edges. This is also what I've used here, and this works quite well and stabilizes everything. So at first I'm copying the original pattern to a new paper, and then I'm adapting the pattern according to the safety pins which I've put into my old bikini bottom. As you can perhaps see, the paper is folded in the center back or center front. I'm drawing only 1/2 and then cutting this half, and automatically it mirrors to the other side. So afterwards I'll get a pattern which is completely without fold, because like this it is much easier to cut out the fabric.
At the side seams, I have to take care that the curves of front and back are transitioning smoothly. And I also have to check that the lengths of the side seams are equal. Both points also apply to the crotch seam. By the way, there at the side seams and the crotch seam, I'm adding 7 mm for the seam allowance, and all other edges I'm drawing without seam allowance. Here I'm now cutting the fabric, and as you can see, I'm cutting it 1 cm wider along the upper edge and the legs, and at the side seam and the crotch seam I'm cutting along the paper because there the seam allowance is already included in the pattern. The lining here in grey I'm cutting exactly along the paper pattern edge.
Okay, to have a first fitting, I've now sewn the main fabric pieces together with a long straight stitch. This is because I can undo this very quickly, and it's just for the fitting. And afterwards, I have to make another order of the sewing steps, so I have to pick up these seams anyways. When I'm wearing this, of course, I have to imagine that here along this border, this is -1 centimeter.
So the first fitting went well, and now I'm pulling at the threads so they come off. And now I'm closing the side seams in the main fabric and the lining. Of course, I had to change the thread color because of the color of my fabric, but unfortunately in this light gray color I don't have a bulk yarn, so I'm just sewing with the regular overlock sewing machine yarn. Then I'm preparing the seam at the upper edge. At the front edge, I'm even drawing on the seam line. At first, I'm pinning both layers together with their right fabric sides together.
Here, that's the front edge, and here I will start and stop my seam, and afterwards sew the edge with the regular sewing machine because I cannot do this with the overlock sewing machine. And I'm sewing with the main fabric layer on top, and then comes the elastic tape. That's important later because like this, the edges fold nicely around the elastic tape, and yes, it just looks nicer.
While sewing, I'm pulling a tiny little bit the elastic. Honestly, I don't know if this is necessary, but let's just see how this comes out. So this is how the front corner looks like. I'll sew now with a straight stitch here in the corner area. And of course, this seam has to start end to end exactly in the overlock seam, so that both seams come together at one point. Afterwards, I'm clipping the seam allowance in the corner. Then I'm stitching along the seam. I'm stitching on the lining and through the lining layer and the seam allowance layer. Then I'm making the leg seams one after the other with the burrito method. That means I'm putting lining and main fabric, right fabric sides together, but I'm wrapping these layers around the rest of the bikini bottom. Here I'm now closing the first leg seam, again with overlock sewing machine and the Fram Elastic silicone elastic. Afterwards, I can turn around the bikini bottoms to the right fabric side. Then I'm stitching again the seam allowance to the lining layer with a zigzag stitching, and I'm starting from each end and I'm sewing as far as I can get with the sewing machine. Now the first leg is done, and now I'm sewing the second one with the same technique. I've closed now the crotch seam quickly with a long straight stitch just to make another fitting. And I found that in the crotch area, just between my legs, there is a little bit too much fabric. It looks a little bit bulky. So I've decided to cut it here and to reduce the length a little bit. But I'm cutting only 2 cm from the back part. Afterwards, I'm stitching it back together, but this straight stitching is more like a basting, because afterwards I anyways use an overlock seam. For this overlock seam, I'm reducing the stitch length a lot, so that it will cover well the edge. Afterwards, I'm just threading in the seam ends into the seam. As a last step, I'll put now bar tacks along the leg seam to fix the seam allowance at the crotch to the back. This is what I'm doing now. And then the bikini bottom is ready.
Okay, welcome to day 5. I hope I can finish this project today. Here is the top card from Sewing Machine. And this I use as a base to draw my bikini top. The design is really very different, but of course I need some kind of base pattern. So I'll use this one because it's already drafted for very elastic fabrics and seems for me quite suitable for this project. This is the back part. Here, each line here is center front with fold and center back with fold. And now I'm just drawing in my design.
Of course, I've figured out some measurements on my body with the measuring tape, and these I'm trying to apply here on the new pattern. And I'm just trying it out, honestly. The most important thing is here that the side seams or the new side seams are equally long, so that you can sew them together, obviously, and that the curves are transitioning nicely from the front panel to the back panel. To help me to do that, I've glued the pieces along the side seam together with an adhesive tape just for the drafting process. I'm also already drawing in the outlines for the ruffle. Now I already would like to talk about the mistakes which I've made here, because after the first fitting I noticed that the top is much too tiny. Now you see this curve template which I've used here, that was a huge mistake. Later I've changed the shape of this edge to a straight line, and this was much better. And the second point is, I don't know why, but I've added 2.5 cm along the side seam in the front part. So these are the 2 points which I've changed on the first version of the pattern to improve the fit.
Okay, so here is my pattern. As I will have a knot in the center front, I have reduced here 1.5 cm at the center front to have space for the knot later. This will be the ruffle, this I'm showing you soon. Then I have here the straps in the middle of the original straps here. I can also measure this to have an idea how long I have to make the straps. Then here this is the front part, and here this is the back part.
So now I'm creating the ruffle pattern piece out of the flat shape which I've drawn in onto the front pattern. First I have divided the original shape into equal sections. Then I'm copying these sections with my plastic foil, and in between each line between the sections I'm leaving a space, and this space is later the extra width for the ruffle. At the top I'm leaving 1 cm in between the sections, and at the bottom, to make it even wider there, I'm adding 1.5 cm. So at the end, these sections, including the spaces in between, are my ruffle pattern piece. Now I just have to add the seam allowances. I'm adding my 7 mm at the vertical edges and the upper edge, and at the lower edge, this edge I will leave raw, just like that, cut. Afterwards, I'm also cutting the front and the back pattern piece, and there I'm only adding seam allowance at the center front and the side seam. Okay, so now off to cutting the fabric. For the lining, especially because this is only two-way stretch, I'm taking care that I'm cutting the fabric with the elasticity in the horizontal direction. And as for the bikini bottom, I'm adding 1 centimeter on the main fabric along the outlines of the bikini top. With outlines, I mean here the ready outlines of the bikini, of course. As for the side seam, we have already added the seam allowance on the pattern. At last, I'm cutting stripes for the straps and for the tie knots in the front. The straps are also the first thing that I'm sewing here. I folded them lengthwise into the half and guiding my frame elastic with this seam here. Then I'm making the tie knots, and as you can see, I'm making their ends with a pointy shape. Making all these seams with the elastic is really important here to give more stability along these edges. Then I can turn around the straps and the tie knots to the right fabric side, and as you can see, I'm not using some fancy tool here, I'm just using my old safety pin and wooden spoon, and this works really well. Then I'm preparing the ruffle. I've already added a long stitch or a stitch with an extra long stitch length on the top edge, and then I'm gathering this pattern piece and fixing with pins to the front part. At the top edge, I'm starting 7 mm away from the edge with the ruffle, because there I'll fix the strap later. Then I'm basting the ruffle to the front part with a straight stitch. This makes it a lot easier later when I make the proper seam with the overlock sewing machine. And I'm also stitching on the straps to the back part. Afterwards, I'm going on with the upper edges of the back and the front. At first, I'm pinning the pieces together. And then I'm sewing these edges. Again with the main fabric on top, and I'm also guiding my frame elastic with these seams. And again, I'm also stitching down the seam allowance to the lining parts on all 3 seams with a zigzag stitching.
Now I've also closed the lower edges, front and back, on the part on the upper edge here in the front part. Added a zigzag stitching where I could, in the back it wasn't possible anymore, and now I'm adding ties in the front. So I'm putting these into this. And by the way, the ruffle I will include in this seam. Here I'm now closing this short seam which holds the tie knots on the front pieces. Now it's time to make the side seams. This was a little bit tricky because I wanted to make them invisibly from the outside and inside, but in the end it worked out. So as you can see, I'm turning around the back part to the wrong fabric side again, and then putting with the right fabric side the one front part into the back part, and then I could close the first side seam. This one I'm closing completely, and in the second one I'm leaving a small gap in the lining part so I can turn around the bikini top later
to the right fabric side, and also this gap is needed to sew on the straps to the front part later. Now I'm attaching the straps to the front part. I've made a fitting to try out the correct length for the straps, and I'm just measuring this correct length, and then wait a moment. Then I'm inserting the loose end of the strap into the hole which is still open on the front part, and then through the gap in the lining I can turn around the whole thing to the wrong fabric side, and then I have access to this area here where I'll make a very short seam to hold the strap in the front part. And you know what? This was extremely difficult. I would say I repeated this short seam at least 3 times until the result was satisfying for me. This was really the most difficult seam on the whole bikini. As soon as the straps are attached, I can turn around the whole thing again to the right fabric side. Now I'll close the gap in the lining. And this I'm just quickly doing with a straight stitch on the regular household sewing machine. Last step now is to place some bar tags. I'm placing 2 along the side seams, one at the upper edge and one at the lower edge. And of course this is visible, so I have to use a matching thread color. I'm sewing also a bar tag at the upper edge, at the back side and at the strap. So this is just extra secured when wearing the top. So this was it. Thank you for watching this video. My bikini is ready. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you again for the last part of the swimwear sewing project. Bye!